Hello, hello, hello. I am so excited to be here today with a fellow coach and friend that I've known, wow, for a little over a year. I had the pleasure of meeting through ICF Austin. And when I said that I was doing this podcast, I felt so supported by the coaching community that I have because a lot of my friends jumped on to help promote it, grow it, and be a part of the conversation. So today I have the pleasure of speaking to Mark Wigginton. Mark helps business professionals get unstuck as they work their way through midlife. His clients say his personal experience with midlife transformation helps them reframe their perspectives around major life goals and develop action plans for success. At 44, Mark was stuck. He knew something had to change. Changing jobs again wouldn't solve the problem, and he tried over a dozen times in the previous 15 years, and he knew this had to come from within. That's when he got unstuck. He stopped running away from his past and started running towards his future. Literally, over the next 10 years, he went through a complete physical and mental transformation from a self proclaimed couch slouch to an Ironman triathlete. He found a job that fit him well and stayed for the next 15 years. But most important, he learned to make peace with perfectionism. Mark's career includes roles as sales professional and trainer, business consultant, mental health counselor. With 40 years of business experience, 2 degrees in psychology, and a postgraduate certificate in business and executive coaching, he's well equipped to guide his clients as they discover their own path to getting unstuck. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So, without further ado, here is Mark.
Hi, glad to be with you today.
Ah, it's so nice
Vanessa,
to see you.
it was exhausting just listening to that story. Oh my God.
Oh, it was inspiring for me. I was like, oh man, I love everything. So many things to talk about.
Yeah. Really kind of a cool coincidence that we're doing this today because the incident that really sparked my change in my early 40s, my mid 40s, happened on July 11th in 2004. So we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the
Wow.
evolution of me and kind of my introduction to coaching and all those different pieces. So
I love it. Well, happy
very cool.
almost anniversary. I'm so
Yeah.
honored that you are here speaking with me. So tell me a little bit more. First, I normally jump in with like, tell me how you got into coaching, but your bio said a little bit, but I'd love to hear it from your own words.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to do that. So I mentioned in there that I have a couple of degrees in psychology, and in one of the transition phases that I went through during that 15-year window when I had actually close to 20 jobs, I try to downplay it a tiny bit. I got my master's degree in counseling and became a licensed professional counselor. And I spent about 7 years here in the Austin community working all over the place in community mental health. I kind of my main gig was I worked at the Travis County Jail. A
Oh,
lot of
wow.
stories tied to that, but I
Oh,
worked in
wow.
every facility in here. I worked in private practices and kind of did everything I could to make my way as an entrepreneur, as a counselor in that field. And I just finally got to a point where I couldn't. I mean, I got to a point where I couldn't pay my house note anymore, and I went back into the business world. And making that transition back into the business world, I moved back into training, something I had dealt with earlier in my career. And the very first opportunity I had was to go work with a consulting firm that was, so this is like 97, 98, that was talking about this really new model of coaching. It was brand new at that point. People had kind of done it, but ICF was really coming into its own. It was really coming forward. So I spent a couple of years traveling around North America, teaching from a particular book and teaching coaching tools that came out of that book. And that got me turned on to it. I really understood the tie-in between business and counseling and how to tie mental health together and all those pieces. So I started my formal coaching training back then in 2000, like 2002, 2003. And I was kind of still doing lots of side hustles as I went through, trying to figure out who I was when I grew up. And I had a chance to go to work for a company for a year. And 17 years later, I left that company. So my coaching journey
Wow.
got postponed until I was much later in my life, and kind of looking back and going, gosh, what happened, and where did all that time go, and what do I want to do next? So finished my credentialing in 22 and 23, and hung out my shingle, and helping folks work through midlife changes, and most of the work right now is with career.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I have so many questions because even in just reading your bio and hearing your story, I wonder what your thoughts are on this. Like, I feel like everybody has a midlife crisis. Like, unless you know what you want and you're that gifted person,
Yeah.
because I am always like struggling to find what's that thing, what's it going to be, and I have to imagine that everybody goes through some sort of version of this. What are your
You know,
thoughts?
I agree with you, and I think it's really just kind of a natural progression of growth. I think a lot of people who are kind of professionals in the transition community talk less about midlife crises these days, and try to reframe it more as transition. Or
Right.
there's a lot of discussion of chrysalis, the same kind of model of somebody
Mm.
evolving from, the caterpillar evolving to become the butterfly, and kind of getting that big squishy middle. And that's kind of what happens at midlife. And part of that comes from changes that have happened in psychology in general over the last 50 years, where people have really understood how much growth happens. There was a period of time when people thought that we didn't mature anymore. We were kind of set in our
Yeah, past
20s, and
our
by the time we
20s.
were
Yeah,
40, yeah, by the time
you're
we got to
done.
40, we were done learning and growing and changing. And that's just not true. So,
Neuroplasticity. I'm such
right.
a neuroscience nerd, and it is really
Yeah,
fascinating. Like, you can learn until the day you die. Your
right.
brain can make
And should.
your neural pathways.
Yep.
Right, right.
And should
Yeah,
learn till the day you die. Doing Wordle, right? You do Wordle every day, and that's something that just helps keep your brain stimulated, and helps
yeah.
continue to change those. Just like the physical changes lead to changes in your mitochondria, and the same thing. Your body continues to grow and change and evolve the more you work it, and the brain is just another muscle that grows and changes.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's so fascinating, and in every conversation that I have, if ever, but because I am also a career coach, right? So I love the
Yeah,
way you frame that. Is it's more of a evolution, really, like as you
yeah,
grow and transition and learn more. I always say I've had a charcuterie board of jobs.
yeah. I
Little-
call it a mosaic.
yeah. So I'm like, I tried this, I tried that.
Right.
And it is like now I'm 37 at this point in my life. I'm like, oh wow, like all these pieces are coming together where
Yeah.
if I was so hard on myself, I look back and I'm like, what the hell was I doing with my life? But it's so wild how every piece of every job and skill I learned in the jobs I've had now are like, oh, it all makes sense,
It
like
does. And it's so cool that you're able to do that now, right? I'm, almost 30 years older than you, right? I'm 64, and I went through a very big change last year, really, really major dramatic change in my life last year. And a lot of that has led me to reflection. And that's when I've really come back to look at a lot of these elements in my own life, and in my own, I call it a career mosaic, because you think a mosaic is all either little pieces of glass in a window, or it's a design, but it's all
Yeah.
shards that come together to create something beautiful. And when I was in the big hairy middle of it, was like, oh my God, what's going on? I can't do it. I'm always changing. Did this for 6 months. I did that for 6 months. I did that for 15. And now I'm able to look back, and I can see a string that, started when I was 12, when I had a
Yeah.
paper route, and traveled all the way through till I left full-time work at 63, you know,
Yeah.
and seeing following those pieces, it's really just, it's, you wish, right? You wish you could go back and understand it kind of in real time, as it was unfolding. And
Right.
it's nice to be able to see it now. And that's what I help people do, right? Is go back, like you just said, and see the threads in your own path, and how they tie in, what the career anchors are, what the real pieces are
Yes.
that you learned and you took forward with you, because they were things you found fun or fascinating, or just enjoyed. They were the happy part of work.
Yes, yeah, and I think it takes a lot of courage too, to do that, right? Like, while you're working through it, not just
Yeah,
sit back and be like, "Okay, I'll figure it out someday," but
yeah,
being like, "Nah, Imma figure it out right now."
yeah,
So you mentioned it a little bit in your bio, but your focus now is helping, people move past perfectionism
yeah.
and accept their lives where they
Yep.
are now. Tell me a little bit of more about that.
You talk about the struggle with midlife crisis and how many people struggle with that, or midlife transition, and how many people struggle. Well, I think it's, X times that number of people struggle with perfectionism, and whether it's something as a kid where they were never enough, or they had, really goofy dynamics in their family, or what happened. I think that's one of the things that really drives people is never being enough. It's kind of the flip side of imposter syndrome, right? They run kind of hand in hand, perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And getting to a place where you understand all you can do is all you can do, and all you can do is enough, is something that's really important. That's what I learned through movement, right? Through running. For me, it happened to be that movement was running, but that's what I learned as I went through that process, how to stretch myself, how to accept, you know, kind of what was real for me. I will tell you that if you went back and you looked at there's a program called Athlinks, and Athlinks tracks like your history of races. And if you looked at my Athlinks history and you went back, you would see that when I was 40 something and I was in the 40 something age group, if there were 10 guys in my age group, I was seventh. If there were 100 guys in my age group, I was 70th. If you look at my 50s, 70, I was in, if there was 10 guys in my age group, I was seventh. If there was 100, I was 70th. And if you look at my 60s, the same thing is true. I had to learn, or I chose to learn through that process, that uh, I could I could do all I could do, and that was enough. I wasn't really competing with anybody else in that race.
Right.
There'd be 15,000 people in that race. There maybe were five that had a chance of winning, right?
Right,
Maybe
right.
that was true in each age group, that there might be five people or three people as you get older in each age group. And you just have to get out there and perform it the best that you can for you for that day, right? And doing all the work, everything that you need to do to kind of build up to that is all part of it. But it just comes to acceptance. It comes to acceptance. And for me, that's what led me away from perfectionism. And that's what allowed me to settle, right? It's like this Vanessa, it's like this weird paradox, and I call it the paradox of stillness, right? When I wasn't running, and I wasn't, physically fit, and I didn't understand about movement, and I was dealing with shame, and I was dealing with all the kind of junk in the past, I would bounce from job to job. I wouldn't stay very long. Something would happen. I wouldn't do it good enough. I'd quit, or there'd be a layoff, and I'd be caught up in that, and all those different pieces. And I mean, literally from you read in my bio about the 15-year window. So, from 1992 to 2007, I had two major career changes and close to 20 different jobs. And from 2007 to 2022, when I left full-time work, I had one job. I mean, and
Wow.
it's just, when I looked at that dichotomy, what was the change in me? The change in me was that I became, confident in who I was. I became okay doing the best I could, and that freed me to explore in a really, really different way. It allowed me to work in a really different way, and kind of in a sales role that was really different from the way anybody else in the consulting company that I was working with did it, and it allowed I had I gave myself permission to be myself, to explore things the way that I wanted to explore them. And that's kind of what led me to that stability, and allowed me to make the changes to free myself from that bondage of perfectionism.
Yeah. I find that so interesting because also I would say I'm a runner, I think that it's a love-hate relationship over my lifetime, but I've
Yeah.
done
Yep.
triathlons, I've done a bunch of full marathons, half marathons, so I know it'll last throughout life. But I think it's really funny, we kinda talked about the power of our brains, but so many people would be like, "You ran a marathon? Oh god, I could never do that." And I'm like, "No, I don't believe everybody can
Yeah.
do it, and maybe
Right.
should, because it is like such a sense of accomplishment when you're like, you start out day one, 0 miles. knowing you're getting to 13, knowing you're getting to 26, and being like, there's no way I can ever do that. But oftentimes now in life, I think I did that. I can literally do anything. Like I ran
Yeah.
26 miles. I started out
Yep.
0, ran 26, didn't die.
Yeah.
I could do anything I
Yep.
put my mind to. Um, Tell me more about your
And
experience. What do you think?
well, I have to say that I agree with you. I'm also going to say that there are probably people listening to this that might not choose to even have movement because they go, oh, I could never do that, right? And so it doesn't have to be running a marathon, right? It doesn't have.
Right.
It's what it is. Could be dancing, could be could be yoga, could be whatever you choose it to be, as long as you have some kind of movement in your life as you go through. But and I really kind of got driven by it, right? That one of again this study that I've done in the last year of my history, there are some really interesting coincidences that come out, and so my running journey progressed into triathlon, and ultimately progressed to an Ironman triathlon. So
Wow.
talk about being in a place where you go, holy cow, if I can do this, I can do anything, um, because there you're the end is a marathon,
Yeah.
to get to the marathon, you ride 112 miles on a bike and swim 2.5 miles in open water, you know,
Yeah. I
and
know, it's
and
wild.
just being able to evolve to that place. When I was going to turn 50, I was 49, maybe just before my 49th birthday. I was like, I really don't know how to swim. I can like bat my way to the end of a pool and back and forth, but I don't really know how to swim it. And so I really want to learn before I'm 50 how to do that. And I really would like to know. My birthday's in March. And so I started going through the process, and I found triathlon through that, right? So I would run, and then you ride your bike, and then you swim. So I'm starting with the length of the pool in March of 2009, and in October 2009, Decker Lake, which here in Austin, is kind of out in Southeast Austin. I'm swimming with 1,200 people in open water, a half Ironman, 1.2 miles in open water in a period of like 8 months, right? And then I proceeded on that, and 6 years later, I was swimming 2.4, 2.4 miles in open water, and spending 17 hours every minute that you're allotted, 17 hours in constant movement. You finish that and you go, yeah, dude, I can kind of accomplish whatever I want to. And the thing, Vanessa, that's so interesting to me as I've done this study into myself about this, I went back and I tracked my sales performance. My single best sales year was the same year that I did that Ironman triathlon.
Ugh.
So I'm the amount of training that it took, the amount of discipline that it took to be able to do that here all summer. Austin, so you know what it's like. Be out in Williamson County on the in the middle of nowhere doing
Hot.
80-mile bike rides by myself in the heat, and then running 10 or 12 miles afterwards as part of the training. It taught me what my limits. Well, it taught me that I didn't have limits. It showed me kind of where I really was, and that translated directly into work. It translated directly into changing the change I saw in my mindset. It's funny. It's been almost 3 years now since I left that job, and I've still talked to former clients, and contacts that I've made. The very first question they always ask me is, "You still running?" That because they saw this transformation. I mean, the physical transformation as well, where I evolved from a guy that was 225 pounds and running to a guy that was in the 170s, right? That was I lost 50 pounds. Some of it comes back, it bounces a little bit, but I've maintained a 40-pound weight loss for almost 20 years, which is another kind of amazing
Huge accomplishment. Yeah.
thing. So I think I went too far into
What?
my story, sorry.
No, no apologies here. It's fascinating and I think very inspiring for people to hear. You made me curious about goal setting, and you're an ICF certified coach, so you understand
Yeah.
the mindset of the ICF and those core competencies. So, what do you think is the correlation there with having like a goal that you're working towards for everybody who's
Yeah.
listening? Like, ugh, how do you do it?
How do you ask your question again? How do you set goals? How do you integrate
How do
them?
you like, I think I said that in my mind. It's like goals I find are so important, but most people are like, yeah, I want to do that, but I don't even know ever how to get there. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I think
Okay.
as a coach, we really understand the importance of like, it's okay to set goals and the
Yeah.
needle may move, like you said, even with your physical health, right? Some months you're up, some weeks you're down, some years you're like, yeah, I'm running a half marathon. Next year, maybe I won't run at all, but it's
Yeah.
a journey, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
tell me more about what your thoughts are on the
I,
goal aspect of it.
Well, I mean, I think it's important, right? Goal setting obviously is important, and like you say, it's a big thing that I think we all work with our clients is helping them sort through the process, and breaking it down into small, achievable steps is something that I kind of talk a lot about co-creating, right? And partnering with clients and friends and other people in my world to just kind of help them uncover the baby steps, the pieces to get there. Again, back to the conversation about perfectionism, right? Understanding and making that shift from understanding that long-term goals are okay. And like you said, sometimes you make progress and sometimes you don't, and that's okay too. That's important to remember. It was a 20-year journey for me to get my coaching credential, you know, and it's because I started early and I got about halfway through it and life got in the way, but I kept
Right.
it in the back of my mind. It's like my counseling credential, which I also have, and I've had for 30 years, right? I went through almost 30. I went through, the career change where I went back to business, and every 2 years I did the continuing education. I paid the money to keep it certified because I knew someday I'd come back to it. So, I think for me, and one of the things I kind of talk about a lot with people is moving away from instant gratification and
Mm.
understanding the value of that long-term goal. Now, you can have short-term goals. I will tell you that I was very specific on daily incremental things that I had to do. I had it written out. I had it on my phone. I had it everywhere, right? I knew that you don't just go, well, I think I'll go run
I'm going to do
a
an
half
Ironman.
Ironman. Yeah, you trained took me 2 years, right? Took me 2 years. So I made my first attempt in 2013, and I bombed on the run. I mean, I was actually in Lake Havasu, so it was in Arizona, and
Oh, wow.
I made it through the first 10K, and I had lessons to learn. We'll leave it at that. I had lessons to learn. And we were sitting in the Vegas airport, and my wife looked over at me and went, "You're doing this again, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, and here's what I learned, and here's what's going to happen different." And I worked for 2 years to get to a place to be able to go out and do it and accomplish that goal, you know? So it was taking the lessons of that instead of being, oh, my perfectionism would have been, oh God, who did I think I was to do something like this? To being able to say, okay, what are the lessons? What are the lessons learned? What can I take away? And applying it and figuring out where the gaps were. And then understanding everything that it was going to take to pull all the pieces together in all the different elements of my life, and at work and my relationship and family and all the different things that had to come into play. And there were journeys. That was a journey as well. I mean, after I finished the Ironman, we came back and my wife and I were walking around the hike and bike trail in Austin one day, and I looked over and I said, "Gosh, it seems like it's been so long since we've done this." And she said, "Yeah, it's been 2 years." I was like, "Hmm." And we went to, there's a little Mexican restaurant by our house, and we went to this little restaurant, and I was like, "Man, it seems like it's been a really long time since we've been here." And she's like, "Yeah, it's been 2 years." And it was a number of those before I went, "Oh,
Mm.
I had this big hairy goal. I
Yeah.
achieved it, and there were things that I had to let go. There were things that, what suffered in that. She was my biggest
Right.
cheerleader and supporter, but we had to let things. I had to let things go to do that, and that led to new decision. Right, I don't do that anymore. Right, it's not, the
Yeah.
value isn't there. It's almost been there, done that, but the value's not there because of what had to be sacrificed to get there.
Yeah.
So a long, twisty answer to goal setting. I'm not sure you got what you were
No,
after there,
I
but
think
I mean,
it's I love hearing your story. I think there is such, value in hearing what people go through and reminding them, like, because you can get so, to your point, perfectionism that you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is the only thing that I'm doing in life."
yeah,
And then
yep,
it's okay to get there and then reflect back and say, "Oh, okay, some of these other things suffered because of that." What you
yeah,
made me think about was, having all these tools in your toolkit. I tell literally anybody who'll ask me this question. Like, I have a lot of tools. Like, I have my therapist, I have a coach, I have another
Yeah.
coach, I have a mentor, I have my partner in life who is a lot
Yeah.
of things to me. Um, and I think that that's really important. Obviously, I'm a coach, so I'm a big advocate for coaching. But what do you say to people who are like, oh, I don't have time for any of that? Like, I don't have time for coaches. I don't have time to have these conversations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're ready, it's here. I mean, that's kind of the reality. That one of the things, when you think about the Venn diagram of coaching and consulting and counseling, and I've kind of worked in all three areas, you look at the commonality, the overlap in the Venn diagram is skill set. It's our skill set, right? It's questioning, it's effective listening, it's empathy, all those kind of elements. But if you look at the differences in all those different areas, the difference between coaching and counseling is there's kind of a hierarchical thing in counseling, right? And it's also a little more backward looking than forward looking. And coaching is peer almost, it's co-creation as you go through, and you're helping them uncover the answer. And consulting is kind of the other way. It's like you're taking the lead and telling people the answers. You're forward focused, but you're taking the lead and telling people the answers. So coaching is co-creating. So if somebody comes to you and they say, yeah, I really want to do this, it's like, cool, how? When you're ready for it, I'm here, and we can work together any way that you need to, and empowering the person rather than telling the person, how to get to that next step. And I think that's what attracts people to coaching, is that it's about empowerment. It's about us as coachees, right? And all of us are, I think, that are coaches, understanding the importance of stepping into your power. Again, circle all the way back to perfectionism, right? Stepping into being able to say, I can try this. And if it doesn't work, I can try something else. And that's okay. No one's going to beat me up. You know, no
Yeah,
one's going
that's
to,
what's
no
the
one's
fun
going
of
to,
life.
yeah, right.
What would you say to somebody who's just embarking on a self-discovery journey and kind of in that place of stuckness that I know I have been in, and
Yeah.
I read that you've shared that you've been in. What would you
Yeah.
share? What advice would you give to them?
I think the most important thing is to know that, to understand and get the perspective of time, right? To understand you don't have to solve it today, to understand that you can work on it, to understand that you can keep growing, um, and that you're okay where you are, and it's a starting point. One of the things that I talk about a lot with folks, I'm kind of always trying to talk about transferring the lessons that I learned running, in serious endurance training, right? I mean, big time endurance training, and how that changed as I aged. You're saying you're 37 and have run several marathons. I didn't start. I ran my first one when I was 46, right? So I'm a late bloomer in this game. And so as I've learned how to run, I've also had to learn how to deal with aging. I mean, the first time you hear you're a senior runner, you're like, dude, I just started. How can I be a senior runner? But as I've evolved, I've had to learn specific things, and I think they literally transfer into the kind of conversation we have about where you start. And number one thing is that you have to train where you are. You have to start where you are, and you might be heavy, you might be slow, you might be injured, you might be whatever, but you can't look back and say, gosh, I wish I had started when I was 37, or I'd started in my 20s, so I already accomplished a bunch by the time I was 37.
Right.
You have to embrace the reality as a real foundation to build on as you go through. The next thing is you have to understand that consistency wins. So it's a lot better. It's a lot more important to do things daily and incrementally rather than push all the time, to build slowly as you go through the process. In running, you say consistency outpaces performance, right? Or outpaces intensity. There's a lot of discussion these days about heart zones and zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 through zone 5, and people talk a lot about spending time in the lower zone to build a big base. Same thing's true in business, right? And in life. Consistency, doing small incremental things wins. And then the last one is that the small things that used to suck time away from what you love to do, from running, they now are the big things. And so in running, that's mobility and nutrition and rest and recovery and strength training and all those things. And in business or in life, it could be planning and family and, time out and dinner, and it could be all those different elements. But the small things that kind of get it, that were distractions before, have to become the foundation of the new you. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah. And I feel like,
last,
yeah, go on,
go
go on.
ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to say the last thing that I just discovered in the last year, 18 months or so, has been the importance of journaling and capturing where I am in my journey all the time, or if you're just starting out, where you are in your journey all the time, to be able to have that kind of information to go back and reflect on.
Journaling is something that I've wanted to do and get into. And I think I'm reading a book right now that the mom left all her journals to her children, and they're discovering this fascinating stuff about her through the journals that they are now reading post her passing. And I was like, man, maybe I should do that. That would be a fun thing to learn and remember. And then I was thinking even just about my kids, like, oh man, it would be so fun to share the little funny things that they do day in and day out, and for them to read those funny things later in life and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this really embarrassing X, Y, and Z. So we got back Mark on the phone just to end our session out. We had some technical difficulties, and those are always fun and part of life, right? I think it goes to our perfectionism conversation. Not everything always goes the way you had planned, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hold on for 1 second here. Let me get my headphones back going. Okay, so we had the hurricane that hit on the coast yesterday, and I'm sure that that's part of what took out the cable network,
Oh
and
man.
that took out the internet. So we'll see. But we were talking about journaling as we were wrapping up, and again, I think something you said was new to you, or you were working on.
Yeah, I just am trying to incorporate it into my daily practice. I think it would be really beneficial. My one coach says if you journal every day, there's a book in there somewhere, So I am trying to do that because I think it could be a powerful book someday, sharing all the life lessons that I have along the way, or the thoughts or the things that we go through. As a parent, I feel like there's so many things I talk to my other parent friends and I'm like, nobody ever told us this. So if nothing else, a way to share.
And the same is true on my side. So I found The Artist's Way about a year ago. It's funny, I was listening to a podcast, and the author said that there were 2 books that had profoundly impacted him. And one of them was The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And so I picked it up. So I've been journaling. Every day I write 3 pages freehand to start my morning. And it's just really been kind of a pretty amazing thing for me in my own journey. Julia actually says you're not supposed to go back and read it, but I do go back and read it. And it's, last year was a particular milestone year for me. So going back and seeing the change that happened to me in that period of time was something that's been really, really powerful. So I recommend it to everybody. And, you can start with like 5 easy questions that take 5 minutes. And I have the series of questions. If you go if you reach out to me, I can give anybody that's listening to the podcast that wants the 5 questions, I can give them a sheet that has the 5 questions on it that I started with before I went to the consistency of writing 3 things a day. And on the 5 questions, the 5 morning questions, if it takes you more than 5 minutes, you're doing it wrong. So there's no excuse not to be able to start.
Yes, this is inspiring. Mark, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I appreciate your time so much. How can our listeners get in touch with you? I know you mentioned they reach out, but what's the best way to connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn, and it's Mark Wigginton. My practice is focusing on results. So you can get me through www.focusingonresults.com as well. But I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So that's probably really the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. Your story is so inspiring, and I really appreciate you sharing your time and wisdom with us. Do you have any parting words for our listeners?
I really think it's just about getting things that we've already talked about, just getting out there and starting, understanding that you have to start where you are. You can make a change. If you're stuck, you can get unstuck. And that's the key. I often think about the the me that was kind of in a hotel room after living in hotel rooms for 7 years, going, how the heck do I get out of this? And that started my journey 20 years ago, that led to me being able to make a new kind of decision in my life. So start where you are, ask for help, know that it's okay to ask for help, and just make the changes you want to be. You're worth it.
Ah, beautifully said. Thank you so much, Mark. I hope you're safe and that you don't have any more problems from the hurricane that are coming through. Stay safe.
Yeah. Thanks. You have a great day. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.